Welcome to the fourth section on reading in Module 1. And this section is how to choose the right books to read and what books I personally recommend. All right, let's jump right into it. I would say when it comes down to choosing a book, for those who are new to reading, I would say start with something that you're interested in. There was a book that I read called Limitless by a guy named Jim Quick. Great book. I highly recommend it. In the book, he talks about being considered the boy with the broken brain, right? He's a grown man now, but early in his life, he had a head trauma accident that caused him to not be able to function properly in school anymore. He couldn't intake information at the same speed his peers could. So he had to force himself and learn alternative methods of reading. And the first thing he decided to start reading was comic books. He started reading the X-Men comics because he liked the fact that the X-Men weren't necessarily superheroes. They were actually mutants. They were outcasts of society. They were people who didn't fit in necessarily. So they had to get their own school and get their own area so that the rest of society wouldn't bully them, essentially. What we can learn from this is he's the world's biggest brain expert right now. Jim Quick, look him up yourself. And the interesting thing about his story is that he started just by reading comic books. He started with something that he was interested in. So I would say start reading with something that you're interested in. If you're a basketball kid, or if you're a football guy, or if you are someone who likes fashion, start reading things that you like. If you like fashion, read Vogue magazine, start there. But actually read it, don't just look at the pictures, right? If you're into basketball, read some basketball books. Read a Michael Jordan book or read Mamba Mentality, the Kobe Bryant book. Highly suggest that. I read it myself, and it's really it's a decent book. It's just a bunch of pictures and captions, but it's him talking about his experience as an NBA player. You want to start reading things that you're interested in. Me, when I started reading, the very first book that I read was on success and on bettering myself. And I didn't know at the time that what it would end up being was me leaning into self-help and self-discovery. And that type of book was the type of book that would ultimately change my life and that I would ultimately write. Shameless plug, go and read my book, Materialize, Top 10 Manifestations. Why would you not? If you already did, you feel me? Blah. But the first book that I read was essentially a self-help book, because I was interested in success. I was like, man, how do I become successful, man? I keep hearing these people say you can be anything you want, you can accomplish any of your dreams, but I just don't know how to do it. How do I go from 0 to 60? I'm not a kid who, growing up, I didn't have anything. If you know my story, then you know my story, but we grew up really rough. We grew up really poor. Even I despise the word poor because it's the worst word in the world to me. Poor and ugly are the worst words in the world to me. I just never want to hear them. You know what I'm saying? So I grew up at the bottom. So I had to figure out for myself, how do I become successful? How do I do this myself? And I kept hearing people say you can do anything you want. You just got to do it. I just didn't know how to do it. So the first book that I read was 12 Traits of the Greats, a book by Dr. Dave Martin. And that book was phenomenal. That book really changed my life. That book really put me on the path to reading more books and discovering more and more and more about myself, and ultimately embedding a lot of those traits and qualities into myself to make me who I am today. So I started reading something I was interested in. It was a self-help book. You know what I'm saying? And since then, I've read a bunch more books that are classified as self-help books, but they're really just a bunch of knowledge wrapped up in just book form, So I would say, if you're just going to get started reading, read something that you're interested in. I could sit and I could say, read this encyclopedia or read the dictionary like Malcolm X did, but it's just not practical. It's not realistic. I didn't read the dictionary whatsoever. I started reading by something I was interested in, So you could start reading a comic book if you're interested in comic books, Marvel, DC, anything you want. You could start reading about some of your favorite TV shows. How about one day a week, instead of actually watching a TV show, you could look up the transcript. You could look up the script. You could look up, a recap or something. You could look up something that will allow you to read it instead of just watching it on TV. Because as we learned in the last section, when you watch something, it just projects images into your mind. It doesn't actually help you. But when you read something off of a page, it causes your imagination to turn, and your mind has to now co-create images along with what you're reading. So for example, I like to tell people, Harry Potter book, right? If you take a Harry Potter book and it's a plain book, let's just say there's no cover on it, and you give it to 10 different children and you tell them, hey, read this book and then draw me a picture of how Harry Potter looks, each one of those 10 kids, even though they all read the exact same book, are gonna draw a different picture of what Harry Potter looks like. Some are going to draw him short. Some are going to draw him chubby. Some are going to draw him skinny. Some are going to draw him with little glasses. Some are going to draw him with big glasses. Some are going to draw him with a big forehead, small forehead. Everyone in the room is going to draw Harry Potter differently based on the descriptions that They read because while they read the words, their minds turned and created an image of what this person looked like. But because they're all individuals, they don't have like one hive mind, everybody's creating a different image. You know what I'm saying? So I would say there's so many different creative ways to get involved in reading, but you definitely want to start somewhere. So start with something that you're interested in. If you like basketball, read something about basketball. If you like fashion, read something about fashion. If you like cartoons, read, an anime or read a comic book or something like that. Like that'll really start helping you. I started with a self-help book just because I just really wanted to learn how to be successful. So you can also start there. You know what I'm saying? And if you do want to start there, we're going to just naturally run into my next section. The next section is my recommendations. So I'm gonna list to you right now 5 books that are my top 5 books that I would highly recommend any and all individuals to read, no matter who you are or what you're interested in. Are you ready? Here it goes. Number 1, The War of Art by Steven Pressfield, right? The War of Art by Steven Pressfield. Not The Art of War by Sun Tzu. When I say The War of Art, a lot of people think that I'm talking about The Art of War by Sun Tzu. I'm not talking about the book The Art of War. No, I'm talking about The War of Art by Steven Pressfield. It's a thin book with a white cover on it by a dude named Steven Pressfield. This is my number one favorite book to recommend to people because that book changed my life. That book is extraordinary in so many ways that I can't even express it all right now. But I can just put it into one sentence, what it's gonna give to you. What that book gave to me and what it gave to every single person that I recommended to, because any person that I gave that book to that actually read it has always called me back and always been like, bro, whoa, what is this? It's so true, it's so real, so on point, right? What that book gives to you is a clear-cut roadmap as to why you have won in life and why you have not won in life. The book, the main theme of the book talks about what Steven Pressfield calls resistance. He says resistance is a force of nature that stops you from going from a lower sphere to a higher sphere in life. Resistance doesn't stop you from stop being a doctor and start being a homeless person. No, but if you want to go from being a homeless person to being a doctor, you're gonna feel every emotion under the sun before you get there. Resistance only works in one direction, when you're ascending, when you're going up, when you're coming up. When you want to come up, you're going to feel everything. But when you're on your downfall, you're not going to feel nothing. If you want to just party and lose your mind, you can just do that. You're not going to feel nothing. But if you want to succeed in life, you're going to feel all the worst emotions. Why is that? Steven Pressfield gives you the recipe and gives you the formula and gives you the understanding of why. He says there's an intelligent force out here in the universe, and it's called resistance. And it's positioned to stop you every time you go to achieve something. Man, that book is so fire. I highly recommend it. If there's a way for me to leave a link to the book in the PDF underneath this video, then definitely download the PDF, copy and paste the link, and buy that book immediately. That's the number 1 book I would ever recommend to anybody in the world. That book changed my life. It gave me the recipe to realize, man, I have succeeded in life because I overcame resistance at this point, and this point in my life. It was hard, but I kept going and I overcame it, and that's why I won. And then I have failed in my life in all these different ways because I let resistance stop me. Fear stopped me, procrastination stopped me, worry stopped me, distraction stopped me, all these things that are all encapsulated into one thing, which Steven Pressfield calls resistance. Bro, when I tell you the book is fire, it's fire. Go and get it. That's my number 1 recommendation. If you only leave this module or this course in general with that one book, I think you're gonna be okay. All right, boom, go and get it. Second book I highly recommend. This book is just my favorite book one of my favorite books because it's such a good read and it's on money. My second favorite book to recommend to people is a simple book, small book, only 10 chapters, and it's called The Richest Man in Babylon, right? The Richest Man in Babylon, written in the 1920s by a dude named George S. Clayson. This book is fire because the book is on finance. The book is about money. The book is about how to save money, how to use your money to make money work for you, and how to live a successful life by following the laws and the rules and the energy and the frequency of money as a whole, right? It's so good. If you've ever read The Alchemist or if you ever read any story, it's fire. Some of these other books that I'm recommending are just really books that are teaching you and telling you how to live. Do this, do this, do this, do this. Cool, I get it. The Richest Man in Babylon is different because The Richest Man in Babylon is a story. And it's a story that's told over the course of 10 chapters in the book from the perspective of 10 different people or 10 different individuals who are in each chapter that all had some sort of encounter with the richest man in Babylon. The very first chapter is the man who desired gold. One of his old friends of childhood was sitting on a wall. I could go into it, but I'm not going to go all the way. But he was sitting on a wall, and then he ended up speaking to one of his other friends and said, I'm so disheartened and dissatisfied with my life because I'm not making any money. I don't know why I'm older and I don't have any money. And his friend said, yo, we just never learned how to make money. Why don't we go learn it? He said, you know what? You're right. Who is the best person in Babylon that could teach us how to get money? The richest man in Babylon. Who's the richest man? Our friend from childhood. His name is Arcad. Let's go to his house and let's ask him to teach us how to get money. So they went, and Arcad accepted him into the house and said, yo, I'm going to teach you how to get money. This is how you do it, right? Then after that, the king needed help in Babylon. So he's like, yo, who can help me with this money problem? There was like the richest man, talk to him. Then after that, the story goes, the richest man showed his son how to get money. It's just every single chapter is a different person who came in contact with the richest man in Babylon. The book is so good because it talks about how to earn money, how to save your money, and then how to make your money work for you. The book is fire. If you care about your finances, I would highly recommend this book to you, bar none. It will change your life. The book was recommended to me by a friend of mine who was my exact same age, except he had a good job, he had a house, and he had 2 cars. And he had a 3 or 4 bedroom house by himself. And I was like, man, I asked him one day, I'm like, bro, how are you getting so much money? Like, what? Well, he said, nah, I just work a regular job. I'm like, but you're prospering. He said, yeah, bro, I'm prospering because I read this book. It's called The Richest Man in Babylon. I highly suggest you go get it. Bro, when somebody give me the game, I go and get it. So I went and got the book and I read it and I understood immediately why he was succeeding. Because if you follow the principles outlined in The Richest Man in Babylon, you will succeed with your money. Even if you're not making any more money than you're making right now, I guarantee you, your quality of life will increase if you read that book and if you abide by what it tells you. Trust me, trust me, trust me. Get The Richest Man in Babylon. Number 3 on the list, one of the world's most famous books, The Alchemist. The Alchemist is in my top 5 because I feel like The Alchemist is a book that's good for your soul. Versus the first book, which is The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, which is really how to succeed in life by overcoming your obstacles. The second book, which is The Richest Man in Babylon, really about your money. Third book is The Alchemist, and The Alchemist is because I feel like The Alchemist is really good for your spirit. It's a story, and of all these books, it's probably one of the easiest ones to read just because it's a story. It's an entertaining story, but I think that there's so many life lessons in it that it's a book that every human being should read. It's just beautiful from beginning to end. It's so well written. It's a story about a boy who's a shepherd in Andalusia, in Spain, and he has a dream of treasure and adventure, and he decides to bet on himself and see if he can make his dream come to life. And he goes through so many obstacles, but over the course of the story, he learns how to communicate with the universe. He learns how to communicate with nature. He learns how to communicate with strangers in a different land. And he ultimately becomes a far better person at the end of the book than he was at the beginning. I highly recommend that book. I think that book is just good for your soul. It's just a good soul read that will just raise your frequency and just be like, you know what? There are so many life lessons I can take from this book that are just extraordinary, So I highly recommend The Alchemist. Just one of the best ones. Number 4 on the list. Number 4 on the list is a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, right? Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. The reason why this book is on my list is because my sister recommended the book to me, and my sister started out as a nurse. She was just a regular nurse. She read this book, and the next week she was already buying property. And I was just kind of perplexed by that. I'm like, what are you doing? She's like, yo, I'm taking my money. I'm also asking other nurses if they want to get it in this investment. And I'm going to buy this piece of property. And I'm going to fix it up. And I'm going to sell it for a profit. I'm like, how'd you even... She's like, yo, read this book. Once I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I understood. Rich Dad, Poor Dad is a story written by Robert Kiyosaki. It's pretty autobiographical because it's about his life. The book in the title, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, is based on his actual life. Because as a kid, he had a rich dad and a poor dad. His poor dad was his actual father, his biological father. His rich dad was his best friend's father. And he just grew up watching the stark differences between this man who's his dad, who teaches him all these different things, but he's poor at the end of the day, and this other guy who's like a father figure who teaches him all these things, and he's rich and prosperous at the end of the day. His poor dad was someone who always spoke about go to school, get a good education, so one day you can get a good job at a good company. His rich dad said, learn financial literacy as best as you can so one day you can buy a good company. The book is phenomenal. It really talks about the difference between a poor mind and what it produces in life, and a rich mind and what it produces in life when both of these men had the same opportunities to start with. It's an incredible book. I highly suggest you read it. It'll just help you with financial literacy. It's really a book about money as well. But I think deeper than money, it talks about the person. The person behind the money is far more important than the money. You know, like there's a saying that people say, a fool and his money will soon part. Man, I've never heard a truer statement. But I think that statement can apply to anything, even beyond money. A fool and his lover will soon part. A fool and his health will soon part. A fool and his friends will soon part. You know what I'm saying? A fool and anything of value will soon part. But a fool and his money will soon part if you don't have financial literacy. Definitely read the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I guarantee you, when you read that book, you're going to be able to see some people in your life that are like, oh, wow. One of my parents was like this person for sure, depending on the government and their 9-to-5 job. And someone else in my life was definitely this free thinker that was like, no, this is how we're gonna get financial literacy. This is how we're gonna get ahead. Definitely recommend that book. Number 5 on my list, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, right? This book is fire. This book is probably written, I think, in the early 1900s, maybe 1920. Written by a dude named Dale Carnegie, right? And it's a phenomenal book. Of all the books on my list, this one is special, particular to me, because this book is the only book that I've ever read in my entire life that I naturally said by the time I ended the book, I was like, this book is magic, right? It's the only book. Every other book that I read it. I do my best to reread what I think is interesting in the book so I can memorize it and I can tell it to somebody else. But How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie is the only book that I ever read that when I got to the end of the book, I felt like everything that was inside of the book was automatically inside of me. I was like, man, it just felt like magic. I remember specifically on one day while I was reading that book, this was at an old job that I had. I was working at a warehouse. I was a mover, furniture mover. And this guy who was the manager, he didn't pay us on time. And I thought that this guy was like trying to run away with the money. So I was really mad. I'm like, I'm going to go in there. I'm going to get this guy a piece of my mind, right? But beautifully, as the universe always works, before I went in there, I opened up one of the pages of How to Win Friends and Influence People. And right there, like, was just this story of, hey, when someone offends you or when you think somebody deserves anger, don't match fire with fire. You can't put out a fire with fire. You got to put out a fire with ice. You got to put out a fire with water. So if a situation, you think a situation calls for rah, 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 I'm going to give you examples. And in that page, it gave like 5 examples of a person who could have been mad, should have been mad, would have been mad, but decided to take a cool approach and the whole situation changed. Like one lady got her rent reduced. One guy stopped these kids from starting fires in a park. It was just a really interesting thing. So I was like, man, this is crazy. That's so interesting. I'm about to go in here and get this guy a piece of my mind. So crazy enough, I did end up going in there and speaking to him, but my energy was way cooler. I was way more cool. And I got the result that I wanted. The guy was like, I'm really not trying to like make anything bad happen for you guys. It's just, there was a complication with somebody in another office. And it was true. It wasn't even his fault. So I was happy that I read that at that point in time, but it was so beautiful because it wasn't something that I felt like I needed to remember. It just automatically became a part of me when I walked inside that room. So I highly suggest reading How to Win Friends and Influence People. Some of these books are older books. They weren't written like in the year 2000 at all, but they're phenomenal, man. They will change your life if you read them, right? That's my top 5. The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, Richest Man in Babylon, The Alchemist, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And I'm gonna drop one more book into this list before we end the video. This is our special number 6 book of King Hoodie's Book Club. This book I highly recommend if you're somebody who has trouble with change or anybody who has trouble dealing with things that just aren't expected in your life. I highly recommend this 6th book right here. It's called Who Moved My Cheese by Dr. Spencer Johnson. Who Moved My Cheese is an incredible book, and it's specifically designed for people who deal or who have a hard time dealing with change. I'm somebody who I had a hard time dealing with change a lot because sometimes you get into a routine of how things should be, and when things change, it's like, oh man, am I gonna be able to function in this new environment, in this new space? I think it's a common human, trait. Who Moved My Cheese really, it's a dope book. It's the only book that I've ever read in one day. That's how small it is. It's a super small story, really well written, really well put together by Dr. Spencer Johnson. The book is about 4 little creatures, And every day they run into a maze to find cheese. Two of the little creatures are mice. They just have these little tracksuits on with these little sport shoes, and they run into the maze every day to find cheese. Two of the other little creatures are like humans. They're just called like little creatures, but they're pretty much like humans, but they're small. They're the same size as the mice. Their job is to also run through the maze every day and find cheese. They got their tracksuits, they got their shoes. So every day, all four of these, these guys in teams of two mice and two little people, they just run inside the maze to look for cheese. They go into the maze, look for the cheese. Every day they find cheese, they eat cheese, and then they just go home. One day, these four little people inside the maze find the biggest section of cheese that they've ever found in their entire life. So the mice, they take their shoes off, they start eating the cheese, but they keep their shoes near them and they keep their tracksuits on. The little people, they start eating the cheese up in this big station. They don't got to go search for cheese anymore because the section is so big. They can come back to this section every day. The little people, they take their tracksuits off, they hang their shoes up in the back of the closet, they put a house there, they start showing it off to their friends. This is our life, this is our cheese, we've made it, we've succeeded, life is good, we don't need to go through the maze anymore, life is great. One day, the four little people go inside of the maze and they find that the cheese is gone. That cheese station is empty now, it's gone. The two mice, they say, oh, bet, no more cheese. They put their shoes on, they run through the maze again. So the two little people, they end up having a problem with this though. They start discussing, oh my goodness, what happened to our cheese? Who moved our cheese? That was ours. Life is so difficult now. What's happened? What's gonna happen to us? This isn't fair. We did our part, and some great force out there just destroyed our lives, right? One of the little people, he attempted to tell his friend, hey, look, the mice, they just put on their shoes. They went running through the maze again. Shouldn't we just go? And his friend was like, no, we've already done the work. We've already made it to this part of our life. And no, it's too hard to go backwards into the maze again. No, we just got to sit here and wait for the cheese to come back. Book goes on. By the end of the story, the conversation between two little people ends up getting so heated that it's like, you know what? One of the little people says, the cheese isn't coming back in this section. I got to adapt. I got to change. I'm going to go get my shoes. I'm going to put them on. I'm going to go run through the maze. My friend, I love you, but I have to leave you here because you are unwilling to change. So the two little people end up breaking apart. One goes through the maze to find cheese again, and the other guy stays there and complains and screams and curses his maker, right? It's an incredible book. I highly suggest anybody read it. It's super small. It's the only book I ever read in one day. Not because I'm a fast reader. I'm actually not a fast reader at all. But I was able to read it in one day because it's that small. So that is my top 5 book list plus one extra. The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, Richest Man in Babylon, The Alchemist, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, How to Win Friends and Influence People, and the 6th book, Who Moved My Cheese by Dr. Spencer Johnson. This has been my book list. In the PDF section underneath this video, I'm going to leave a link to every single one of these books so you can just download the PDF, copy and paste the links, and then go and get the books yourself. I highly recommend the books. Highly, highly, highly. Can't tell you enough. And yeah, man, I hope you guys enjoy the books as much as I did. And I think they're really good places to start for changing your life, especially Who Moved My Cheese. Like, in the essence of reading, for anybody who's not naturally a reader, Who Moved My Cheese might be the best book to read because it's small, it's short, it's just a story, and it really talks about change. So it might be the first place where somebody should start when it comes to change. I don't know. What do you guys think? This is the end of this section on reading. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Hopefully it was as good for you as it was for me. We went over the history of reading. We went over the power of reading. We went over the reading habits that are highly successful. We went over how to choose the right book to read. And we went over my 5 top book recommendations for you guys to get. All right. The next section is on diet and exercise. I'm super excited for you guys to check that spot out. But make sure to download the PDF underneath this. And man, I wish there was a comment section. I don't think there's a comment section in this site, but I wish there was a comment section so you guys could drop some comments. But if you like this and you're in the course, DM me, send me a DM, drop a review or something like that. Just send it to me directly and I'll make sure to get it. But I appreciate you guys. Look forward to seeing you guys in the next module. And this has been module number 1 of the Infinite Optimism course on reading. All right, peace. See you in the next one.